Greetings and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching an overview of Exchange 2013. To start with, what is Exchange Server 2013? Exchange Server is an on-premise in-house server application that provides messaging capabilities and more for your organization. Put simply, it's an email server. But really, when you look at all of the features and necessary capabilities within Exchange, as we'll discuss in a moment, you just cannot narrow it down to two words. It's massive, really, when you really start to dive deep into what Exchange Server can do. But that's not meant to scare you off. It's not so massive that it's impossible to learn. You'll see. Let's just look at some of the basic features and clients that connect to Exchange Server, and as we work through the discussion here, you'll see that it's not something that you have to be afraid of. It's something that you can master. It just takes a little bit of time. And we'll spend that time together. So some of the noted features of Exchange Server 2013 include the ability to send and receive email, calendaring, which gives you the ability to keep track of your own calendar as well as those of others, along with resources in your company like meeting rooms or equipment like projectors. There's contacts. There's a way to view and manage your own personal contacts, as well as a way of looking at the entire company global address list for easy contact retrieval. And then there's tasks for task management. Supported clients include Outlook, with Outlook being really the premier client. That's the client of choice for connecting to an Exchange server, because really the two were designed by Microsoft to work better together, and so they work better together than any third-party vendor can create. But that's not to say that third-party applications cannot work with Exchange. In fact, Exchange supports POP or IMAP clients, and so as long as your email solution uses POP or IMAP, which they all do, then you'll be able to connect to an Exchange server. You just won't be able to get all of the robust features that typically would come with Outlook connecting to Exchange. There's also ActiveSync mobile clients, and these are implemented in different ways as well, whether you're working with a Windows phone or an Android phone or an iPhone or an iPad. So depending on the ActiveSync client itself and the operating system, the actual solution may vary in terms of how it works with Exchange. And then we have web-based Outlook web app type clients. So if you've ever worked with Outlook web app or Outlook Web Access back in the day, that's what it was called, some kind of mini web application to connect into Exchange, well, then in all of those cases you understand that it's a web-based client for connecting to your Exchange email. Now, to say that Exchange Server is the most widely used server messaging solution on the planet would not be an understatement. In 2011, Exchange had an install base with hundreds of millions of mailboxes on Exchange servers. Now, these were primarily on-premise deployments, and they represent 76% of the worldwide base. So the value of learning Exchange is huge in terms of potential career opportunities. Sure, we always hear about niche server products that can add to your earning potential and prove your flexibility. And when you look at Exchange, it's been around for such a long time, so maybe some of that sexy new solution vibe has worn off, and folks are steering toward things that are newer and more exciting, maybe SharePoint or Lync as the solution of choice to learn. But let's face it, without Exchange at the base, you just don't have a true communications and collaboration platform. Exchange, like Active Directory, has become somewhat the de facto solution for organizations. Consider that Exchange has 65 to 70% of the market share across all organizations. So there is tremendous value involved with. You just have to see how the Exchange community feels about it. Just recently, we were at the Microsoft Exchange conference, which hasn't been held in over 10 years. And so to put everybody together in one place again and to reintroduce the Microsoft Exchange conference, or MEC as they call it, it was such an exciting vibe through the entire conference. And there was no doubt in my mind, nor in the mind of others, that Exchange is just as relevant and just as fun to be a part of as any other solution that's out there these days. Speaking about the Exchange community is, in a word, awesome. They're helpful when they can be, and commiserating when they have to be. Because let's face it, with every solution, there are going to be aspects that we just all have to deal with and say, well, maybe they'll fix that in the next release. But everyone, from the Exchange team themselves all the way to the bloggers who share information freely for all, is helpful and makes for a community spirit that is unmatchable. Now, if you want to tap into that community, the Exchange team has a site. You can see it there, msexchangeteam.com. There's also a Microsoft-sponsored Exchange community site, immech.com. You can see the flood of information from the team, from Exchange MVPs, and from others by following the Twitter hashtags that are mentioned there, MSFT Exchange or immech. You can go to TechNet for more information. It's just filled with information. And there are a ton of other Exchange-specific sites and blogs to help you learn just about anything and everything. So it's a great community to be a part of. Everyone from the Exchange team over is really helpful, and we work together to make sure that as a community, we're constantly learning more and finding ways to utilize Exchange better within the various on-premise and cloud-based environments. Exchange is nearly 20 years old, and it has made some amazing progress over the years. I don't think it's fair to jump right into Exchange 2013 without nodding in approval to all of its predecessors over the years. So here we can see pre-Exchange 4.0, Microsoft Email Transport was done internally on Xenix-based 68000 systems. That was until 1993. In April of 1993, the move to Exchange began internally. That's where they started to eat their own dog food. That's an expression that's used basically to say, look, if we're going to promote this to companies out there in the world, we have to be willing to use it ourselves. And so Microsoft is famous for this expression of eating their own dog food, deploying the solution internally before they release it to others. In June of 1996, Exchange Server 4.0 was released to the public. So you can see they spent quite a bit of time working on Exchange 4.0 before they released it out into the wild. In May of 1997, Exchange 5.0 was released, and then in November of 1997, Exchange 5.5 was released. Now, Exchange 5.5 was where I jumped into the game. It was new and exciting for me then, and it is still new and exciting for me now, with new releases always raising the bar. Exchange 2013 is no different, with new features that we'll outline soon enough. Moving forward, in November the year 2000, Exchange 2000 was released. Now, there was no direct in-place upgrade path, but there were these connectors that allowed us to coexist and then transition from Exchange And from this point, we've seen service packs released for Exchange Server 2010 as well. We've had two service packs, Service Pack 1 and Service Pack 2, and both to coexist and allow for migration to Exchange Server 2013. And that leads us to today. Exchange 2013, our on-premise solution for providing email services and more. At the same time, we have Office 365, which provides a hosted, cloud-based Exchange environment that's supported and maintained by Microsoft themselves. Through Office 365, in addition to Exchange, you can also have SharePoint and Lync online services without all of the muss and fuss of an on-premise deployment. So some might ask, well, why would I want to deploy on-premise if I can just let Microsoft handle things like anti-malware protection, high availability, disaster recovery, and more? Well, that's a great question. Microsoft believes that half of your current on-premise mailboxes that organizations worry about will be moved to a hosted environment over the next couple of years. There are some advantages and disadvantages of one over the other. Let's take a quick look at some of these. So here's a simple chart that just shows some of the reasons why folks, especially smaller businesses, may look to a hosted Exchange solution, be it through Microsoft's Office 365 or some other solution. So you can see that the on-premise Exchange allows for on-site operation speed. It's much faster to have an on-premise Exchange server, and so if speed is an issue, then you want to keep it on-site. It allows you to have total control of your messaging environment, which with some organizations, depending on the size of the organization and the need for security or the need to have control over how it's managed, this could be a very big concern, and so total control may be exactly what you need. Customization is also something that an on-premise Exchange environment offers that you don't typically get with a hosted Exchange environment, whether it's Office 365 or some other hosted solution. Now on the flip side, hosted Exchange offers availability guaranteed. Someone else is worrying about your high availability, and they promise a certain level of uptime. So that's part of your agreement. If that becomes a problem, you typically get money back on that solution if that uptime service level agreement is not maintained. There's no single point of failure. They're responsible for making sure of that. There are no hardware costs. You can have your Exchange environment up and running, and you don't have to spend a dime on the server infrastructure. It's easier to set up and scale. You can set it up in minutes instead of hours, and if you need to grow it, you just let them know you need more mailboxes, and they take care of that. It allows for anywhere connectivity without the hassle. You don't have to worry about certificates and so forth. They take care of all of that. Upgrades are handled, especially with the case of Office 365. Recently, they went from what was called BPOS, the Microsoft Business Productivity Online Suite, and they upgraded to Office 365. Well, you as an IT admin don't have to worry about things like that. They worry about it. They do the upgrades. Disaster recovery, again, it's handled by them, not by you. So it's one more headache that you don't have to worry about. And then things like anti-malware, spam, virus protection, this is all handled by the hosted solution. So you might be thinking, well, why bother learning on-premise Exchange at all? Remember something. Just because millions of mailboxes will go to the cloud doesn't mean that there won't be millions of more, hundreds of millions more actually, on-premise. There will be. In fact, in some cases, you have these hybrid environments where the cloud has some mailboxes, but there's still an on-premise infrastructure. And with Exchange 2013, there's an even easier method of managing both if you're working with Exchange and Office 365. Now we know with our scenario, we're working with a company that has chosen to go with an on-premise deployment because they want and need total control over their messaging environment. So we have our motivation in this case to use an on-premise Exchange. But as an Exchange admin, if you're called into an environment to help design a solution like this for others, even though you may like deploying Exchange and may want to encourage an on-premise environment, or maybe they already have one, they have an Exchange environment and maybe they're asking you about upgrading, going to the latest flavor of Exchange. If moving them to the cloud makes more sense for the client, then you should encourage that move. Now, as for what it takes to learn Exchange 2013, well look, it's big. But there are edges. And what I mean by that is sometimes when a subject is so big that you look for miles in all directions and you never see an end in sight, like something like SharePoint, well, that can be discouraging. That's not the case with Exchange 2013. It's big, but there are edges. Let me show you what I mean by breaking Exchange down into 10 basic components. Okay, so we're going to look at the substantial focus elements for Exchange. On the one hand, we have planning and deployment, recipient and database management, security and certificate administration, clients and mobile device management, and role-based access control permissions. So there are 5 focus elements on the left side. Those are pretty much the basics for getting any Exchange environment up and running. In addition, to really round out your knowledge of Exchange and see the edges in all directions, we have 5 additional focus elements. There's messaging policy and compliance, anti-spam and anti-malware, backup and recovery, high availability, and unified messaging. Now, that's not to say that this is the only subject matter on Exchange that exists based on these 10 buckets. Not at all. There are many subjects, and most of them fit inside one of the buckets. Take virtualization, for example. Virtualization of Exchange is certainly a subject that is worth your attention. If we had to put it anywhere, we would make it part of the planning and deployment bucket that you see. Archive might be part of messaging policy and compliance. Auditing, same thing, messaging policy and compliance. Now, you might add additional buckets as you expand your knowledge out. For example, interactivity with SharePoint and Lync. That may be in its own bucket for unified communications. In fact, we might add unified messaging to that bucket if we wanted to expand this out and connect it to other subjects. So we're not saying that these are the only subjects for learning Exchange. What we're saying is that you can gain a solid handle on Exchange if you know the main concepts that revolve around these 10 subjects. So that's what I mean by seeing the edges. Take Chinese as an example. The largest Chinese dictionary has 56,000 characters. That is massive to learn. But they say in order to read a Chinese newspaper, you have to know about 1,500 to 3,000 characters. Now, that may not be entirely true, but the point is still good. And remember, this is just an illustration. That Exchange may offer you many areas to specialize and focus attention, and you can practically get lost in all of it. But I believe by looking at these 10 different buckets, it helps to show you the edges and should bring some relief in terms of anxiety when thinking about learning such a big solution like Exchange 2013. And we're going to talk about all of these. So rest assured, we're going to touch on each of these different buckets in the lessons ahead. Now, before we get into some of the new features of Exchange 2013, which is for those of you who already have some background with Exchange and you want the lowdown on what's new and awesome or just new, let's just jump over to a server and pull back the curtain for a moment so that you can see what Exchange 2013 actually looks like. Nothing takes the anxiety out of learning a new server solution like showing the user interface for management. Well, unless that user interface is pure PowerShell, which may actually lend itself toward more anxiety. But rest assured, that's not the case here. Yes, there is a management shell for your PowerShell management, but we're going to take a look at the Exchange Administration Center. Let's jump over to a server and get our first peek at Exchange 2013 administration. And here we are on a server running Windows Server 2012. This is a member server connected into an Active Directory domain for Spytech Prime. So just to show you the administration interface, if we click the Explorer, we already have the Exchange Admin Center up. And again, it's a web-based console for administration, something very different from the consoles that we've worked with legacy versions of Exchange. If we log in, the first thing we need to do is kind of like our Outlook web app. We have to provide the time zone that we're in, and then it brings us to the Exchange Admin Center, or EAC. Now, for the most part, we're going to spend a lot of our time here. When you look at all of the different options here that we have, including things like if we click servers, we can see that we have the server, databases, there's our one database at this point, database availability groups, which is all about high availability. With one server, we're not able to even set this up at this point. You would need multiple servers to accomplish that. Virtual directories, certificates. So you can see there's a lot here. Protection. Here's the malware filter information. Mail flow. Here we see rules, delivery reports, accepted domains, email address policies, receive connectors, send connectors. Now, if you've worked with legacy versions of Exchange, then you've seen all of this before, but you've seen it in a very different way. The Exchange Management Console is what we've used for years now, and it's set up completely different. The goal here with the EAC was to put things in a better order so that really you found your tools connected to the things that you did most of the time in the right places. The goal of the EAC was to make it easier for you to find the tools that you need in order to configure the things that kind of go together a little bit better. Have they accomplished that? Well, that remains to be seen. Over the years, as people get more comfortable with it, they'll no doubt say, oh, this is the best version of Exchange Management tool we've ever seen. That's what people said about the Exchange Management Console, and yet still we see changes, and so this is the new iteration of it. The EAC is something that will take some getting used to if you've worked with GUI-based Exchange Management Consoles of the past. Now, in addition to the EAC here, we also have other ways to work with Exchange, and that is the Exchange Management Shell. To locate that, and if you're new to the Server 2012 world, then not to worry, this is something that will take some getting used to as far as the start screen. It's the whole Windows 8 interface that's been built right into Server 2012. But notice here, right on the start screen, we have the Exchange Management Shell tools. We select that, and it opens up the Exchange Management Shell. And you can see that if you've never worked with PowerShell before, and if you've never worked with the Exchange Management Shell in legacy versions of Exchange with 2007 and 2010, then you've probably never seen this screen. But basically you can see it revolves around command line, and we're going to be talking about this in a future lesson as far as how you use PowerShell to manage your Exchange environment. So we have these two tools, and so hopefully just by looking at it here, it takes some of the fear out of learning Exchange 2013, because you can see the edges, as we said earlier. Unified messaging, you can see mobile devices, here we see mobile device mailbox policies. There's a lot to learn, but it is learnable. Okay, so now let's jump back over to our slides, and let's talk about some of the new features to Exchange 2013, how Exchange 2013 has taken things beyond its predecessors. So let's talk a little bit about some of the new features in Exchange 2013. For starters, let's discuss the new Exchange Administration Center. Now, if you've worked with legacy versions of Exchange, everything from Exchange 2010 on down, well, then you know that this is a real deviation from the previous models, because previously we always had some kind of management solution that we would install onto the system itself. So, for example, with Exchange 2010, we have the Exchange Management Console. And so there was also an Exchange Control Panel, which was a web-based console, but it was very limited in terms of what you can do. But now they've sort of morphed the two together. Now there's no longer an Exchange Control Panel, nor is there an Exchange Management Console, but instead we have the Exchange Administration Center, or EAC as they call it. Now, unfortunately, the EAC brings to mind the quote, "EAC, you're riding it, dude." Yes, I can't help but think of the line from Finding Nemo whenever I think of the new admin console. But seriously, the GUI-based Exchange Management Console, EMC, as well as the web-based ECP, Exchange Control Panel, these have now been replaced by a single web-based user interface that is, frankly, in my opinion, one of the least of all of the favorite Exchange 2013 features. I personally don't like web-based consoles for administration. They always feel a bit clunky and unfriendly. Plus, it also has that new Metro look to it, the Windows Server 2012 and Windows 8 look to it, that interface. So I'm not too pleased about that, but I'm sure that everyone will get used to it over time. In addition, we have a new Exchange architecture. So you recall with Exchange 2007 and 2010, I had mentioned earlier that these were broken down into 5 server roles, and that was mainly to address performance issues like CPU performance, which would suffer when Exchange were running as one monolithic application. But Microsoft, they've made progress on the performance side, so Exchange 2013 has just two roles. There's the client access server role, and there's the mailbox server role. The mailbox server role includes all of the typical server components, including unified messaging, and the client access server role handles all of the authentication, redirection, and proxy services. Now, keep in mind, there's still the Edge Transport Server role. You can deploy Exchange 2013 with an Exchange 2010 Edge Transport Server role. But there is a 2013 Edge role planned post-RTM. So at some point they're saying perhaps when Service Pack 1 is released, we should see an Exchange 2013 Edge Transport Server role. Looking over to the left, improvements in policy, compliance, anti-malware. Some great changes there as well. Exchange has had anti-spam capabilities for quite some time. As of Exchange 2007, you could even choose whether to turn on anti-spam in the Edge role or in the Hub Transport Server role. But Exchange 2013 extends anti-spam to a broader set of anti-malware capabilities, such as to block phishing attempts and so forth. So we see a lot of improvements in policy, compliance, anti-malware, e-discovery, and things of that sort. Now, another change to the architecture includes a new managed store. The store service has been completely rewritten, now in managed code using C#. Now, although this change bodes well in terms of higher availability and resiliency, it doesn't mean that the extensible storage engine, the ESE, the database engine, that it's been replaced with SQL, as many administrators would like to see. Exchange 2013 continues to use ESE as the database engine. But now each database runs in its own dedicated worker process, so that a hung process in one database will not cause problems in other databases. So that's one of the values to the store service being completely rewritten. Fast Search, which was an add-on to SharePoint 2010, so you may have heard of that before, that's also been integrated into the managed store for improved search and indexing features. So that's really great stuff. That's something really that you want to keep in mind and remember. We're going to talk more about Exchange architecture in the future, but these are some great new features in Exchange 2013. There's also modern public folders. So rather than just getting rid of public folders, which is something that was promised for future releases, Microsoft has embraced them yet again. They're no longer managed through the separate public folder management console. You recall we talked about how with Exchange 2007 RTM there was no console for public folder management, and we had to do everything through PowerShell actually. Then they introduced the public folder management console that carried into Exchange 2010. But now we have everything in the Exchange Administration Center. In addition, the modernized version of these makes them public folder mailboxes, which means that they use regular mailbox databases. In turn, it also means they can be made part of a database availability group for disaster recovery. So some nice changes that we see there to public folders. And that's not all. Let's look at a few more new features in Exchange 2013. We see lots of PowerShell commandlets, new commandlets. Although 13 commandlets have been removed, most of those having to do with the old public folder management, which now we've changed, Exchange 2013 has over 180 new PowerShell commandlets. So PowerShell's not going away. For those of you folks who may think, this is just a fad that Microsoft is going through, maybe they'll get rid of it. It's not going anywhere. We have to learn PowerShell, whether it's for administration of Exchange or Server 2012 or System Center capabilities, SharePoint. It's in everything now. So the first real flavor of PowerShell we might have seen is with Exchange 2007, but it's not going away, and so it's time to really start to buckle down and learn PowerShell. Did I just say buckle down? You've got to forgive my speech sometimes, folks. Now, another great new feature is Data Loss Prevention Transport Rules, DLP. We have transport rules in Exchange 2007 and Exchange 2010, but what DLP does is it's a continuation of mail tips in that it warns users when they may be violating policies meant to prevent disclosure of sensitive data. So we might think, what are these disclosures? Well, it might be something like a credit card number or a social security number. If you put that in an email, there are built-in DLP policies that are based on regulatory standards like PCI. And so you can easily build out a DLP policy that can protect really your users from the disclosure of that kind of sensitive data. Now, depending on how you set up the policy, they'll still have the ability to send that information if they choose to, but it gives them at least a warning that they are sending sensitive information and perhaps they don't want to do that. There are also some great Outlook web app enhancements. The whole of Outlook web app has been redesigned. One awesome feature now is support for offline access, which allows users to write messages in their browser when offline. And then they can have those messages delivered when they connect to the internet. So that's really a great feature, especially for those who have mobile devices. Perhaps they're working with Wi-Fi enabled mobile devices, so that if they don't have Wi-Fi connectivity and they want to use Outlook web app, well, in the past you couldn't write emails. But in this case now you can write your emails, and then when you reconnect up to a Wi-Fi point, then you'll be able to send those emails. This is supported in Internet Explorer 10, Apple's Safari 5, and Google's Chrome 16 or later, all of which support the HTML5 local data storage feature. There's also a new set of user interface layouts, UI layouts, that users can choose from for desktops, tablets, smartphone use, and so forth. So it allows you to choose your interface for the actual device that you're working with. As we mentioned a moment ago, built-in anti-malware, very essential. We've had anti-spam for a while, but now we have that anti-malware capability. And then there are high availability improvements that have also been added into the mix. And so we really see that there isn't a major overhaul like we had in previous versions of Exchange, where we went from continuous replication, whether it's LCR, CCR, SCR. Those are the different flavors of continuous replication that we had in Exchange 2007. When we moved to Exchange 2010, everything got pulled together into one heading, which was database availability groups. So we had DAG groups for Exchange 2010. Well, the good news is there hasn't been a major overhaul to database availability groups, so that high availability becomes something we have to learn all over again. No, instead, we still have database availability groups, but they've made some really nice improvements that we'll talk about in a future lesson. These improvements really add to our ability to have cross-site resiliency, not just switch-over capability, but also failover capability, depending on how we have things established. So hopefully that whets your appetite a little bit for some of the later lessons. So for those of you who have used Exchange in the past, Legacy Exchange, hopefully taking a quick glance at some of these new features will whet your appetite for some of the discussions that we have in front of us. So there it is. There's your overview of Exchange 2013. We took a walk down memory lane as we went back to the first releases of Exchange 20 years ago. It's certainly come a long way, as we'll see with Exchange 2013. And if you're new to the Exchange world, hopefully we helped you to see those edges. We helped you to see that this is something you can learn, it's something you can master, and you'll learn it through not only the videos that we have here, but the Exchange community as a whole is very interested in helping each other to continue to grow in knowledge of Exchange, as well as deal with various problems that may come up from time to time when it comes to the various implementations in organizations. So we hope you found this informative, and thanks for watching.